From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Our national forgetting is basically pathological. Our systems, politics, media, culture, are totally out of balance today because of our collective refusal to admit that the Vietnam War was wrong and that the peace movement was right.
Today, we remember Tom Hayden, the legendary anti-war and civil rights activist. He died Sunday at the age of 76. We'll hear Tom Hayden in his own words speaking about the Vietnam War and the power of protests. Then to the man who revolutionized sitcom television, Norman Lear.
I think of Donald Trump as the middle finger of the American right hand. The American people, we are in a democracy. The democracy depends on an informed citizenry, which would be a well-led and informed citizen. I don't think we have a media generally that informs.
At 94 years old, Norman Lear is still going strong and speaking out. The creator of many sitcoms, including All in the Family and The Jeffersons, joins us to talk about his groundbreaking TV shows, this year's presidential election, how he ended up on Richard Nixon's enemies list, and the new PBS documentary about his life that's airing tonight, Just Another Version of You. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The planet has crossed a new threshold. The average carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere throughout 2015 were 400 parts per million. This, according to the World Meteorological Organization. Scientists have long warned carbon dioxide levels must remain below 400 parts per million, if not below 350 parts per million, to avoid catastrophic climate change. Scientists predict the carbon dioxide levels will not dip below 400 parts per million average for decades to come, even if there are aggressive measures taken to cut global carbon emissions. 2016 is also slated to be the hottest year on record. In Canada, 99 people were detained by police Monday at a demonstration on Parliament Hill in Ottawa demanding Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reject the expansion of the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain pipeline, as well as all new tar sands pipelines and infrastructure. Among those arrested was Clayton Thomas Muller, a climate activist from the Cree Nation in northern Manitoba.
We know that they're just trying to test the waters for tar sands pipeline to get that controversial tar sands oil that's been killing Dene, Cree, and Métis people in northern Alberta with cancer, poisoning their food systems, poisoning their water systems, spreading climate chaos across the planet. Justin Trudeau is not the Disney prince that the media has been painting him out to be. He is in collusion with big oil, and we're here today to support these young people, these brave warriors, for the sacredness of Mother Earth, to let him know that he needs to reject the Kinder Morgan pipeline.
Meanwhile, in Iowa, residents fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline say at least one person has been arrested as a group blockaded a waste dump site being used by the Dakota Access Pipeline Company as it bores underneath the Mississippi River. The group, called Mississippi Stand, says two residents locked themselves to a barrel to blockade the road leading to the dump site, halting drilling underneath the Mississippi for hours. This comes as court documents show Hollywood actress Shailene Woodley is slated to stand trial on January 25th on charges related to a protest on October 10th, Indigenous Peoples Day, against the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota. To see our full interview with Shailene Woodley on Monday on her arrest, go to democracynow.org. In Pakistan, dozens of police cadets and guards have been killed after 3 gunmen with firearms and explosives stormed a police training college outside the city of Quetta Monday. This is the provincial home minister.
Following orders of the chief minister, an emergency has been declared in all hospitals. The rescue operation is going on. Reinforcements are coming. Contingents of Frontier Corps and police are arriving. Our focus is entirely on the operation.
Pakistani security forces retook control of the police training college after 4 hours. Authorities say the gunmen belong to the militant group Lashkar-e-Jhangvi. Quetta has seen a handful of deadly attacks by militant groups in recent years, including an attack on a hospital in August when a suicide bombing killed 70 people, mostly lawyers. In France, officials are continuing to demolish the Calais refugee camp known as the Jungle, where thousands of refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Eritrea, Sudan, and other war-torn countries have been living as they seek to reach England through the Channel Tunnel. More than 2,000 refugees reportedly left the camp yesterday on buses headed to refugee centers across France. But thousands more remain in the camp and are vowing to refuse to leave. Monday night, police attacked a group of refugees with tear gas after they began throwing stones at the police. This comes as aid agencies say 3,740 refugees have died attempting to cross the Mediterranean so far this year, meaning this year has been 3 times deadlier than last year for refugees attempting the perilous crossing. To see our report from the Calais refugee camp, go to DemocracyNow.org. With the U.S. election only 2 weeks away, both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are campaigning in Florida today. Recent polls predicting large turnouts of Latino and African-American voters suggest Clinton may carry Florida on November 8th. Clinton campaigned alongside Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren Monday in New Hampshire, where Warren referenced Trump's comments calling Clinton a nasty woman.
Nasty women have really had it with guys like you. Donald, nasty women are tough, nasty women are smart, and nasty women vote.
Donald Trump, meanwhile, appeared on a New Hampshire radio program where he lashed out at adult film star Jessica Drake, who on Saturday accused Trump of hugging and kissing her without her consent. She's the 11th woman to accuse Trump of sexual assault. This is Trump.
And one said he grabbed me on the arm, and she's a porn star. Now, you know, this one that came out recently, he grabbed me, and he grabbed me on the arm. Oh, I'm sure she's never been grabbed before.
A major trade deal between the European Union and Canada appears to be on the brink of collapse after Belgium announced it would not sign the treaty. Amidst massive local opposition in 3 regions of Belgium, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, known as CETA or CETA, was expected to be signed this week. It requires the support of all 28 European Union countries to be approved. But on Monday, Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel said he could not sign the agreement because of opposition led by Belgium's socialist-run Wallonia region, where residents are demanding stronger labor, health, and environmental protections. In Colombia, members of a peace walk have arrived in Bogotá after traveling nearly 300 miles to demand a peace deal between the Colombian government and FARC rebels. The march was led by the family members of 12 politicians kidnapped by FARC rebels in 2002 in Valle de Cauca. 11 of the 12 politicians were ultimately killed, while 1 survived. This is Jean Jairo Hoyos, whose father was one of the politicians kidnapped.
We have walked 450 kilometers to say to Colombia, our nation, that peace is possible, that we can achieve it, that we have to unite and leave behind our divisions, and that we unite in one voice. No more victims. We want peace, and let's make this agreement now.
In New York City, dozens of people protested outside the United Nations Saturday to demand the U.S. stop funding Mexican police and security forces amidst a series of cases of forced disappearances and the repression of social movements. The actions were organized by the Caravan Against Repression in Mexico, which included a teacher from Oaxaca, where police killed 9 people at a teacher's protest in June. 2 mothers of the 43 missing students from the Ayotzinapa Rural Teachers College and Eduardo Garcia Miranda, a student from who survived the 2014 police attack on the Ayotzinapa students in Iguala.
We believe it's very significant to be here in New York because the majority of the militarization projects, the transfer of funding and arms, come from the United States. It's pitiful that many North Americans, including Mexicans who are residents on this side of the border, don't know that their taxes are paying for a war in Mexico that has claimed more than 100,000 deaths and about 28,000 disappearances.
And in Boston, Massachusetts, Harvard University and dining hall workers say they've reached a tentative deal in ongoing contract negotiations after hundreds of Harvard University students staged a sit-in Monday in the lobby where Harvard's negotiations with the Cafeteria Workers Union was taking place. The dining hall workers have been on strike for more than 20 days to demand affordable health care and an average salary of $35,000 a year. Harvard's endowment is over $35 billion. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Legendary anti-war activist Tom Hayden died Sunday in Santa Monica, California, after a lengthy illness. He was 76 years old. Tom Hayden spent decades shaping movements against war and for social justice. In the early 60s, he was the principal author of the Port Huron Statement, the founding document of Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS. The statement advocated participatory democracy and helped launch the student movement of the 60s. Tom Hayden was also a freedom rider in the Deep South and helped create a national poor people's campaign for jobs and empowerment. He also organized in Newark, New Jersey, among his books Rebellion in Newark, Official Violence and Ghetto Response. In 1968, Tom Hayden became one of the so-called Chicago Eight. He was convicted of crossing state lines to start a riot after he helped organize protests against the Vietnam War outside the Democratic National Convention. In 1982, Hayden entered electoral politics, first winning a seat in the California State Assembly, later in the California Senate. We turn now to a speech Tom Hayden gave last year at a conference in Washington, D.C. titled Vietnam, the Power of Protest.
I want to start off by saying how many of you I love very much and known for such a long time, and I only hope that there's enough minutes and occasions here for us to get to know each other again, because we have really been through a lifetime. Today we'll have plenty of time for discussion, for panels, for observations, and at 4 o'clock we'll gather to march to the King Memorial. And I want to just say a word about that. I know that Ron Dellums is going to speak to this, but why was that chosen? It's because, in keeping with trying to make sure our history is told accurately, we have to tell it ourselves, and we have to recognize that Dr. King became a martyr because of his stand on Vietnam, not only because of his stand on race, justice, economic poverty. And there's been a tendency over the many decades to make Dr. King a monument to nonviolence alone. And we need to remember that he was attacked by the New York Times and by the Wall Street Journal and by the Washington Post for being out of place. They wanted to put him back in his place and say nothing about Vietnam, take no stand on Vietnam. There were threats that he would lose funding. There were threats of all sorts. And to distort that, to forget that, to ignore that his monument would be shaped in a certain way to serve certain interests but not others is a disservice to truth, and we have to march there and vigil there and commemorate him as a leader and a martyr for all of us, for peace, justice, and civil rights, not only in the United States but around the world, and persist in making sure that his whole story, including the campaign to end poverty in the United States, is told each and every year and in all of our schools and curriculum. So that's the purpose. This is a way of saying that the struggle for memory and for history is a living thing. It's ongoing. It does not end. Even today, people are debating and reassessing the history of abolition, of slavery, the role of slave resistance, the role of the Underground Railroad, the role of the abolitionist direct action movement, the role of the radical Republican politicians, the role of international politics in what came about, and the role, how it was derailed by the assassination of President Lincoln, the ending of the possibilities of Reconstruction, which were not taken up again until 1960, and the coming of Jim Crow. Each generation has to wrestle with the history of what came before and ask, whose interest does this history serve? How does it advance a legacy of social movements? How does it deny that legacy? We don't know. But we do know that we are here for the very first time as such a broad gathering of the movement against the Vietnam War. It's been 50 years since Selma, 50 years since the first SDS march. So it was a time that changed our lives, nearing a second Reconstruction before the murders of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy. Then came the budget cuts, the end of the war on poverty. Then came the Watergate repression, and we became a generation of might-have-beens. Like Sisyphus, our rock lay at the bottom of the hill. We gather here to remember the power that we had at one point, the power of the peace movement, and to challenge the Pentagon now on the battlefield of memory. We have to resist their military occupation of our minds and the minds of future generations. Memory is very much like rock climbing, the recovery of memory. Each niche towards the summit is grasped inch by bleeding inch and has to be carefully carved with tools that are precise in order to take the next step. Falling back is always possible. But as Dr. King himself said on his last night, there is something in humans that makes us aspire to climb mountains, to reach that majesty, if only for a moment. We are mountain climbers. President Obama has reminded us to remember, he said, Selma, Seneca Falls, and Stonewall. But not Saigon, not Chicago, not Vietnam. We have to ask ourselves collectively why that omission exists and realize that only we can restore a place in the proper history of those times. We suspect that there was a reason, that it has to do with the programming of amnesia, that there are very powerful forces in our country who stand for denial. Not just climate denial, but generational denial, Vietnam denial. There are forces that stand for ethnic cleansing, but not just ethnic cleansing, but also for historic cleansing. And that is what has happened. It serves their purpose because they have no interest in the true history of a war in which they sent thousands to their death, and almost before the blood had dried, were moving up the national security ladder and showing up for television interviews to advertise what they called the next cakewalks. Only the blood was caked. There came a generation of career politicians who were afraid of association with the peace movement, who were afraid of being seen as soft, who saw that the inside track was the track of war. Our national forgetting is basically pathological. Our systems, politics, media, culture, are totally out of balance today because of our collective refusal to admit that the Vietnam War was wrong and that the peace movement was right. In the absence of an established voice for peace in all the institutions, the neoconservatives will fill the foreign policy vacuum. Am I right? Will they not? Will they not advise both parties? I think, though, that American public opinion has shifted to a much more skeptical state of mind than earlier generations, but the spectrum of American politics and media has not. So we can never forget that, of course, it was the Vietnamese resistance and their sacrifice that led to our awakening, along with the civil rights movement at home. It began with handfuls of young people, black students who led freedom rides, sit-ins. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was the first to resist the war. Julian Bond, who's sitting here, was rejected after being elected to the Georgia legislature. Muhammad Ali was stripped of his boxing titles. It also began with the Vietnam Day Committee in Berkeley, growing out of teach-ins, out of SDS that called the First March, the draft resistance. There had never been a peace movement like the one in 1965 that arose out of the civil rights movement and came just weeks after Selma. At least 29 would die at the hands of police while demonstrating for peace. And I'd like here to introduce Luis Rodriguez and Rosalio Munoz and Jorge Mariscal from the Chicano Moratorium, where 4 died, including Gustav Montes, Lynn Ward, Jose Diaz, and Ruben Salazar. Ruben Salazar was an early Juan Gonzalez. Ruben Salazar was a great reporter for the Los Angeles Times who served as a journalist in Vietnam before he started critical reporting on the streets of Los Angeles. And he was shot by the sheriff's deputies. I don't know if he's here, but is Alan Canfora here? Alan, please stand. Alan was wounded at Kent State. 4 died at Kent State, 2 at Jackson State 2 weeks later. And every year, these 2 groups of people have observed memorials, have fought for their place in history, are coming up on their 50th anniversary commemorations, and are here today to learn from us, as we've learned from them, the importance of organizing around the politics of memory. So thank you for being here, and we will remember. We will not forget. We will not forget the 8 who sacrificed their lives by self-immolation. We will not forget the students who helped end the war by shutting down so many campuses. We will not forget the veterans who took the risk of standing up to their commanding officers and resisted from within the military. We will not forget this because this was something like Du Bois' characterization of the general strike by slaves who, through non-cooperation, walked off plantations across the South when they saw the futility of any other alternative and chose to simply walk away and join the Union Army. What happened at the end of the Vietnam War is that people walked away. The campuses shut down. 4 million students walked away. The military was described by Marine colonels in military histories as being on the verge of collapse. They walked away. The counterculture walked away. We all walked away. It might have been otherwise. If King and Robert Kennedy had not been assassinated, we might have been united at least for a moment. At least for a moment. We might have elected a president. We might have ended a war, but instead, we were relegated to wondering what might have been. We lost any basis for our unity, and thus we have not come together since that time. The question for us is whether today we can unify when we never could unify before. Can we do that for the memory of our movement and for the meaning that it holds for future generations? I hope so. I pray so. Thank you.
Legendary civil rights and anti-war activist Tom Hayden speaking last year in Washington, D.C. and the 50th anniversary of the first major anti-Vietnam War protest. It was a conference called Vietnam, the Power of Protest. Tom Hayden died Sunday at the age of 76 in California. You can go to DemocracyNow.org to watch all of our interviews with Tom, including a discussion about participatory democracy from Port Huron to Occupy Wall Street. You can also see our interview with him about his last book called Listen, Yankee, Why Cuba Matters. Yes, when we come back, though, we go to the man who revolutionized sitcom television, Norman Lear. Stay with us.
I got a letter from LBJ. It said, "This is your lucky day. It's time to put your khaki trousers on. Though it may seem very clear we've got no jobs to give you here, so we are sending you to Vietnam." Lyndon Johnson told the nation, "Have no fear of escalation. I am trying everyone to please. Though it isn't really war, we're sending 50,000 more to help save Vietnam from Vietnamese." I jumped off the old troop ship and sank in mud up to my hips. I cussed until the captain called me down. Never mind how hard it's raining, think of all the ground we're gaining. Just don't take one step outside of town. Lyndon Johnson told the nation, "Have no fear of escalation. I am trying everyone to please. Though it isn't really war, we're sending 50,000 more to help save Vietnam from Vietnamese."
Lyndon Johnson Told the Nation by Tom Paxton, here on Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn now to the legendary TV producer and longtime political activist Norman Lear. At 94 years young, Norman Lear has led a remarkable life. He helped revolutionize sitcom television with a string of hit shows including All in the Family, Sanford and Son, The Jeffersons, Good Times, and Maude. In 1984, he became one of the first 7 television pioneers to be inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame. In 1999, President Clinton awarded him the National Medal of Arts, saying, quote, "Norman Lear has held up a mirror to American society and changed the way we look at it." Yes, Norman Lear is also a longtime activist, earning him a place on Richard Nixon's enemies list and the scorn of the Christian right. In 1981, he created the progressive advocacy group People for the American Way, in part to monitor the religious right. The late Jerry Falwell once described Lear as the #1 enemy of the American family. Well, Norman Lear is the subject of the new American Masters documentary on PBS called Norman Lear, Just Another Version of You. It premieres tonight on PBS. This is a trailer.
Television can be broken into 2 parts, before Norman and after Norman.
This is a period of time where we were at probably our greatest change socially. Mainstream television was one of the last things to jump, and the first person to force it over that hill was Norman.
All in the Family was the greatest.
Do you have a quick answer for the people who say the show reinforces bigotry?
Yes, my quick answer is no.
I never said a guy who wears glasses is a queer. A guy who wears glasses is a four eyes. A guy who's a fag is a queer.
We used to say is too hip for the room.
There weren't any African Americans on TV at that time, and I didn't want to disparage a black family.
She's the fuse that sets off Kid Dynamite!
There are lines that were meant for you to say because you were black.
It's time for God's people to come out of the churches and change America.
I was concerned about what I was seeing on television, mixing politics and religion. So I thought, I want to take the flag back for all of us.
He called me and said, "Guess what? I own the Declaration of Independence."
The trailer for Norman Lear, Just Another Version of You. It premieres tonight on PBS. Well, last week, Norman Lear joined us in our New York studio for a conversation about his work, his politics, and his activism. I began by asking him what the title Just Another Version of You means to him.
Well, that's been my bumper sticker for a number of years. And when Heidi Ewing and Rachel Grady, who produced and directed the film and I think did a brilliant job, they happened to see my bumper sticker one day, and they were studying my life and so forth, and they said, that's going to be the title, if you don't mind, of the documentary. And that's the way I feel about it. You know, we are versions of one another, and our common humanity, whatever our color, whatever our ethnicity, whatever, you know, on the surface makes us individuals. In terms of our common humanity, we are copies of one another. Your father, Herman, had a huge influence on your life. Talk about him. Well, his absence certainly did. He was sent to prison when I was 9 years old, and that has, in a sense, haunted me and inspired me. Why was he in prison? He was selling some fake bonds or something. I remember my mother saying, Herman, I don't like those men. I don't like those men. And stifle, my father said, as Archie said all those years later, and went off to Oklahoma. He's going to bring me back a 10-gallon hat. He was arrested when he got off the plane. 2 nights later, my mother was selling all the furniture, and we were moving. We couldn't afford to live in Chelsea. She was too ashamed to live in Chelsea. Here in New York. Massachusetts. Yeah, in Chelsea. And at that moment in time, my dad away, my mother selling the furniture. I'm going to live with an uncle. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do next. Some big, mature fellow puts his hands on my shoulder and says, well, Norman, you're the man of the house now. At which point I think I began to understand the foolishness of the human condition. So talk about how you got into television. Well, I had one. I was a kid of the Depression. I had one Uncle Jack who used to flick me a quarter. That was something, you know, it just knocked me out, that an uncle flicked me a quarter. He said a press agent. I didn't know what a press agent was, but that was my role model. I wanted to be a press agent. I went to California to do that, and our wives, my wife and my cousin became great friends. Her husband wanted to be a comedy writer. They were going to the movie one night. We wrote something together. They came home about 10:15. We went out to a nightclub and sold it. And my half of $40 was, you know, half of what I made in a week. So we started to write comedy. I want to go back to the documentary, Norman Lear, Just Another Version of You. American Masters, Just Another Version of You, yes. American Masters, yes. This is Rob Reiner, who played Mike Stivic, Archie Bunker's son-in-law, on the iconic show All in the Family, talking about the reaction to the series, and it's followed by a clip of All in the Family.
The headline is, All in the Family introduces the world to foul-mouthed Archie Bunker. CBS rolled the dice last night with a new situation comedy, All in the Family, which will either be the biggest hit of the season or the biggest bomb. So, here you go. That's what it says. 8. We did 8 seasons.
You know you're right, Archie. You're right. The British are a bunch of pansies. Pansies, fairies, and sissies. And the Japanese are a race of midgets. The Irish are boozers. The Mexicans are bandits.
And you Polacks are meatheads.
Reinforcing stereotypes or challenging them?
Well, I think for people who understood, and most people did, challenging them. That's why they laughed at them. So talk about All in the Family. And you know, those people who thought Archie had it right and wrote letters, and we received, you know, thousands of them. I can't recall a single letter that said right on Archie that wasn't followed by, but you sons of or you worse than that, or why don't you go back where you came from, Jew, commie, or whatever the hell they could find. And my point being that nobody misunderstood that Archie was, the fool of the piece.
Talk about how you came up with All in the Family and when it went on the air.
Well, I didn't come up with well, I did come up with it. I was doing the Martha Ray show in New York, and a fellow by the name of Phil Sharp, who did I'm trying to remember the situation comedy at the time with Joan Davis, the Joan Davis show. And he was being divorced with 4 kids. I was being divorced with 1 kid. I was having a terrible time in my divorce. I asked him how it was going with his. He said, "I'm fine. All she wanted was my reruns, my Joan Davis reruns." At which point I said, "Well, I'm only doing live." To myself, I'm doing live television. I've got to do something that I own. So I decided to do a situation comedy, which I'd never considered doing before. And at that moment, my partner, Bud Yorkin, was in London and wrote me about this show called, I forget, Johnny Spate was the producer-writer. And I heard about that and decided I would do an American version of that. And this was about a bigoted father and a son-in-law and so forth. I grew up with that. My father used to call me the laziest white kid he ever met. And I would say, "You're putting down a whole race of people to call me lazy? That's not what I'm doing. You're the dumbest white kid I ever met."
Well, that actually goes well with this next clip from the documentary. You're appearing on a CBS talk show, and you're questioned about the use of stereotypes and racial epithets in All in the Family.
CBS News presents Look Up and Live. Today, laughter, hurt or heal?
I have to say, I have to feel that the laughter hurts, that the repetition of these stereotyped terms that we thought had died tends to be hurtful and harmful to the public good.
Well, Mr. Lear, I've heard all these epithets. If they had died, where had they gone to? Do you really believe that All in the Family resurrected them from death? So my mission is to entertain. I chose to entertain with what I consider real people.
Norman Lear, what about that?
I'm a serious man. I was a serious boy, but I did have a sense of humor. I think I mentioned earlier, I learned the foolishness of the human condition very early in life. I chose to deal with it, but in a serious way. Before All in the Family came along, I guess the kind of a problem they were dealing with on Petticoat Junction and Beverly Hillbillies and so forth. The roast was ruined and the boss is coming to dinner. Oh my goodness, does the family have a problem? We dealt with the things that were going on in our family, extended families, the neighbors across the street, up the street, whether it's menopause or economic problems or, health problems, hypertension and black males, and the things that crowded our newspapers and our imaginations. We dealt with it.
Do you think Archie Bunker would have voted for Donald Trump?
I think of Donald Trump as the middle finger of the American right hand. The American people, we are, in a democracy, the democracy depends on an informed citizenry, which would be a well-led and informed citizen. I don't think we have a media generally that informs. It yells, it screams, it does bumper sticker. It doesn't do anything in context. We don't get the news in context. And the American people aching for leadership are tossed a Donald Trump, and I think they say, okay, take this, and they're saying, with that middle finger, take this to the rest of us.
Let's go to another clip from Norman Lear, just another version of you. This is American Masters. This is CBS's Mike Wallace speaking to Norman about his sometimes tense relationship with the networks.
What's your beef against the networks?
I spend hour upon hour arguing with the censors about the tiniest things. The network often takes the position that Norman Lear and the others in the creative community, I mean, how can they do this? How can they bite the hand that feeds them? I consider that the creative community are the hands that feed.
And they're biting
our hands.
So there you are talking to the late Mike Wallace. Mm-hmm. What about your relationship with the networks?
My relationship with the individuals, one-on-one, was pretty good. We understood each other. We were in different, I think it was H.L. Mencken who once said, nobody ever lost money underestimating the intelligence of the American people. To some degree, the establishment lives with that and makes its decisions on behalf of the American people with that in mind. I disagree. I think, we are provably not the best educated, but we're wise of heart, and we understand a lot more than we're given credit for. I'm talking about the population generally. So what we were doing troubled the establishment only because it hadn't been done before. But we were living it. We didn't invent any subject we weren't living with.
Did you get flack from the networks at the beginning? Like, this isn't going to work?
Oh, yes. I made the show originally for ABC 3 years before, 1968. And I made it twice, each time with Carol O'Connor and Gene Stapleton in the leads, different young people. They laughed like hell. I heard from everybody. I was in the room a couple of times and I could see. But they didn't put it on. They were afraid of it. CBS, in the person of a new leader, Bob Wood, put it on with a, advisory, warning people that if they watched it, they might not like it or they'd be frightened by it, or I can't remember those.
Or they might change.
Or they might change. So the last argument we had, they wanted to cut something. New York was on the air 3 hours before California. They were threatening to cut one line from the show. I said, if you cut it, I'm out of here. I won't be back. I wasn't so brave as that sounds. I had an offer of a 3-picture deal at United Artists as a result of a film, Cold Turkey, I had just finished. So I was in good shape. The network at the last minute decided they would leave it in.
Okay. What was the line?
There wasn't one state that seceded from the union. Archie comes back from church having been upset didn't like the minister, didn't like the sermon, left the church early. The kids thought they had the house alone. They were upstairs. They walked in. The kids heard them come running down the stairs. It was clear what was happening.
They were married.
And they were married. And Archie said, 11 o'clock of a Sunday morning. They wanted that line out. But why? Of course, I said they're married, but it'll cause the audience to picture what he's talking about at 11 o'clock of a Sunday morning. Well, but they knew that when they went upstairs. I mean, they had to come out. I thought if I gave in to that, I would be giving in to silly forever. And that's why I said no. And I was almost on my way out of the office. We were working on the script for the 4th episode when I got a call saying they left it in.
Well, that takes us right into reproductive rights and
Yes.
Maude. Maude was a spin-off, right, of
Yes.
All in the Family. So let's turn in 1972 to an episode of your show, Maude, which tackled the issue of abortion a few months before Roe v. Wade became the law of the land.
Look, there's only one sensible way out of this. You don't have to have the baby. It's legal now.
No, she's right. It's legal in New York State. You better give that a thought.
I have given it a thought. Oh, I don't know. I just don't know.
The euphemism for censor was program practices. And the program practices department simply didn't want to deal with abortion.
Simply didn't want to deal with abortion. What happened? What happened with this episode of Maude?
Well, there was a wonderful man, William Tankersley, who was the head of program practices. And I don't know. I said we just had to do the episode. As a result of his talking with me, we made it a two-parter. We added a character, a woman, a friend. She didn't appear in any other shows. She was there for the purpose of being a mother of 4 children she couldn't afford, pregnant with a 5th. She would no more think of having an abortion. So she represented in real life the other side of that discussion. On Maud's side, she said to her husband at the closing of that episode, the second episode, Walter, do you think I'm doing the right thing? And he said, Maud, in the privacy of our own home and our own lives, you're doing the right thing. That's the way the two sides were represented, and that was a result of the conversations with Tankersley.
Legendary television producer Norman Lear tackling the issue of abortion on network television in 1972, before Roe v. Wade. When we come back, we discuss Norman Lear's activism with him, his fight against the moral majority, and how he ended up on Richard Nixon's enemies list. Stay with us.
Songs that made the hit parade. Guys like me, we had it made. Those were the days. Didn't need no welfare state. Everybody pulled his weight. G.R.O.'s now ran great. Those were the days. And you knew where you were. Girls were girls and men were men. Mister, we could use a man like Herbert Hoover again.
Those were the days, the theme song to Norman Lear's hit show, All in the Family. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we return to our conversation with the television producer, longtime political activist Norman Lear, tonight PBS will premiere the American Masters documentary, Norman Lear, Just Another Version of You, the first documentary about the 94-year-old legend who, because of his work, landed on Richard Nixon's enemies list. I asked Norman Lear how he ended up there.
I got lucky. I think I just got lucky. Well, he's on tape. You know, I think we used the tape in the American Masters documentary, where he is talking about with Haldeman in his office. He's talking about that show that makes fun of a good man. Those were his words. And he was talking about that Archie Bunker, though you didn't remember the name, character. And he was talking about we were lauding homosexuality, and homosexuality brought down the Greek,
Empire.
It was Nixon at his Trumpish.
So you have B. Arthur playing Maude.
Yes.
You have Carol O'Connor and Gene Stapleton, this astounding duo. Talk about them as people and your work with them. Carol O'Connor, very much, to say the least, the absolute opposite of Archie Bunker. And Irish, how could he Catholic, tolerate liberal. Doing this?
He must have had a very difficult time in two ways. One, as an intellect, he was speaking like somebody, the antithesis of a smart man, let alone an intellect. And he didn't like most of the scripts, and the best example of it was, we have it in the American Masters documentary, a story that took place entirely in an elevator, a half hour in an elevator, stuck between floors with a Hispanic woman who was about to give birth and who, in the fearful moment of a stuck elevator, did give birth. And I wanted to see that baby born on Archie's face. I just was in love with that from the moment that it dawned on us to do something like that.
Of course, he's turning away at the beginning, turning away. He doesn't want this to happen. He's telling her, just wait, wait.
Yes, because she's Hispanic, he's saying, stop-o, hold-o. But when it finally happened, the expression on Archie's face when he hears the baby cry, first he's alarmed the baby isn't crying, then the baby cries.
Make that baby cry, and you see him out of the corner of his eye starting to look.
And then he says, it's a boy. And I don't know, golden.
Good Times and the Jeffersons.
Yeah.
Talk about the Black Panthers coming to visit and this show, Good Times.
Well, the Panthers came simply to say the only black man on television with a family has to work 2 and sometimes 3 jobs. Can't you? No, it wasn't anything like can't you. They just damned us because, but what came out of that was we have the Jeffersons next door. We've only just found what's-his-face to play George Jefferson. And I knew we were going to have something great, and we decided as a result of that, we'll have him move on up. We don't have to do a black family. We'll do one that, he was in the cleaning and dyeing business. Now suddenly he'll have 3 or 4 stores, and he's moved on up.
Sherman Hemsley played.
Sherman Hemsley, yeah. And it was Janae Dubois, who played the neighbor on the show, who came up with the song Moving On Up, which is kind of an anthem. I hear it everywhere now.
You did a lot of television. You changed television. But you also started the advocacy group People for the American Way. I dare say if you were starting new organizations now, given this presidential election year, you might be doing the very same thing. But talk about what is People for the American Way and why you moved away from TV for that for a while.
Well, in 1980, or 79 and a half, I became very aware of the amount of TV evangelicals proliferating on the tube. Jerry Falwell in the Moral Majority, and Pat Robertson, who even ran for president for a while, and Jimmy Swaggart and so forth, and mixing politics and religion. And I had learned in civics class, the crime of the moment in education for me is they don't teach civics anymore. But when I was a boy, I learned to love my Declaration of Independence, and I underline my Constitution and my Bill of Rights, because they were the protections Americans needed in a free society where everybody is equal under the law. And so I was dedicated to that as a result of those civics classes and learning when my father was sent away from Father Coughlin, who proliferated on radio and hated Jews and viciously anti-Semitic, viciously anti-FDR. And
extreme. I mean, he was a real powerhouse on radio.
Yes, a powerhouse, and he had raised anti-Semitism, to an enormous height. But I had my civics class, which taught me I was protected by the documents that came from our founding fathers. I underline the word fathers because mine was away. I think that's the time I fell in love with founding fathers, looking, needing, wishing for a father.
I just watched another documentary that you're in, that you were the reporter for, and that's America Divided series. And I wanted to play for a moment America Divided, where you are the correspondent investigating gentrification and displacement here in New York City, then going undercover to expose racial discrimination in housing. In this clip, you speak with the New York Times investigative journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Myth that if a lot of black people move into a neighborhood, the property values go down. That's actually true. It's true, though, because of the way the federal government rated integrated neighborhoods. But we've come to believe it's true because black people just don't keep up their properties. So you see the way that a reality can be fueled by a myth.
Reality can be fueled by a myth.
Yes, absolutely.
And is our government doing anything about that?
Well, we have fair housing laws now. We don't have fair housing yet. I don't think we realized how much effort went into creating segregation. We had cooperation from individual homeowners all the way up to the federal government to reorder our society in a way that harmed black Americans and helped white Americans. So you have to break it up. You have to do what you did to create it.
So that's the New York Times investigative journalist, New York Times Magazine investigative journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones. You do an astounding job in this episode of America Divided. That's now on Epix. You came home, in a sense. You lived here in your life in New York. When were you here?
I was here when my father got out of prison. We came to New York. We lived here for about 2.5 years. I went to Weaver High School. No, that was in Hartford. I went to Tilden High School.
Samuel Tilden High School.
Yes, Samuel Tilden High School.
And here you're exposing what the Black Lives Matter movement talks about a lot. I mean, they're talking about, you know, African Americans killed by police officers, but structural racism in our society. And housing is a crucial part of that, how segregated we are. New York, like the third most segregated major city in this country.
Well, it's one thing to read about it and understand what's going on. It's quite another thing to go into it. To sit in a lobby of a building with 14 or so tenants, family representatives, who were paying $600 are now paying $1,900 or something crazy figures, escalated rentals. And they still were wanted out because of gentrification. And so because they had long leases, the landlord had chosen to fix, in quotes, these steps, this wall, that thing, all to cause dust, raised debris, and so forth. And people were getting sick, literally getting sick of it. And I'm sitting with these families, and I mean, the wonder is that I raided my refrigerator last night and had a good night's sleep. How do we human beings live with that?
And you actually, undercover, go in to try to get an apartment after an African-American actor who is deeply affected by this, you know, goes in and they say, you know, that apartment we advertised, it's not available. And you go in.
There was an apartment and a studio apartment. There were 2 apartments for me, and there was nothing for him. 1 day later.
And you go in 1 day later. How did you feel about this? This is not
I felt terrible.
Back then, this is now.
You know, I do not understand how I can feel the way I feel, do what I do, but it is nothing compared to what has to be done. I don't know why I'm not out on the streets. I don't know why I haven't been arrested yet. I don't know why enough is not enough.
What do you still want to accomplish, Norman Lear?
Another hour and a half talking to you.
Well, that would be a pleasure, but I think there is a person who's waiting to take you out right away. But as you take on all these issues, what gives you hope?
I don't know. Congenitally, I don't want to wake up any morning without hope. I mean, that's where I see hope in your face. I see hope in the person who greeted me coming in. You know, I don't wake up in the morning without hope.
Norman Lear, veteran legendary television and film producer, political social activist, philanthropist. The new PBS American Masters documentary premiering tonight is called Norman Lear, Just Another Version of You, chronicling his life and the creation of the hit shows All in the Family, Good Times, Maude, Sanford and Sons, and The Jeffersons. Norman Lear is founder of several nonprofits, including People for the American Way. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. That does it for our broadcast. I will be speaking on Thursday at 7 o'clock at Arizona State University in Tempe at 7. Then on Saturday morning here in New York at the New York Press Club's 2016 Journalism Conference at the Kimmel Center. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.